Thurgood Marshall was an African-American man who lived at the time of segregated America, early to mid-1900s. More importantly, though, Marshall was the first African-American Supreme Court justice, one in charge of the case that unofficially halted the Jim Crow laws and unofficially halted segregation in America.
Being so closely tied in legal matters, he was quite possibly one of the most influential African Americans during this period. His decisions and his life were spent for just one purpose: to gain equality for his race.
Thurgood Marshall was the first African American Supreme Court justice. He was in the ruling of Brown v. Board of Education and was called Mr. Civil Rights for his advocacy for civil rights. He also worked with the NAACP and Charles Hamilton Houston for the fight for civil rights.
Unlike many African Americans who failed in this endeavor, Thurgood Marshall sought to change the lives of African Americans through legal and judicial means. His life's passion was to change the lives of the poor and disadvantaged. What made him so different from others was that he was willing to advocate for not just African Americans, but for all the disadvantaged of his country. He was not only talented, but made a heavy impression on others. According to the Gale Library, William Brennan Jr., a Supreme Court justice, said Marshall was probably the most important legal advocate in America and the central figure in the struggle to eliminate institutional racism. Marshall held hope in all races. His main mission was to make law a reality to those for whom it is now largely meaningless.
He and other members of the legal team in the NAACP knew that if they wanted to be successful in gaining equality for African Americans, that they would have to start with education. In 1935, Marshall worked a case that involved a man named Donald Gaines Murray that was denied admission to the University of Maryland's law school because of his race. Marshall said that since there were not any African American law schools with the same academic ranking, that the school was violating separate and repressive word supremacy. His advocacy for equal education is what pushed the civil rights movement in ways that would not have been successful for anyone with less motivation. He himself was also denied admission to the University of Maryland's law school.
It cannot be doubted that Thurgood Marshall affected society and changed it for the better. President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965 was so impressed with Marshall that he decided to make the man the Solicitor General of the United States. Mostly, Marshall changed his society on a legal and social basis. His actions allowed most to be involved in the government and allowed many who were not represented to be represented. His words coerced others into believing the law, into believing in justice. He did not just change one society, no, he made a mark on several different societies as he traveled from place to place, speaking of the horrors of white supremacy and segregation. In fact, Thurgood Marshall was the head of one of the most societal-changing Supreme Court decisions. When deliberating the case, Brown v. Board of Education, Marshall finally overturned the dreaded societal stigma, the Jim Crow laws. In doing this, Marshall turned society upside down. Due to Marshall's influence over the Supreme Court, the scope of society that he had the power to change became larger. And finally, in 1987, Thurgood Marshall became the first African American to be a Supreme Court justice.
Marshall changed American society in many ways. His words and rulings helped to overturn racist American society and allow thousands of Americans, whether African or not, to truly believe in the government.
As quoted by Vernon Jordan, he was a teacher who taught us to believe in the shield of justice and the sword of truth, a role model whose career made us dream large dreams and work to secure them, an agent of change who transformed the way an entire generation thought of itself, of its place in our society, and of the law itself.